Hi guys, this is Jordan Downey, the co-writer and director of The Headhunter.
And Kevin Stewart, also co-writer, director of photography, and producer on The Headhunter.
We're on this audio commentary going to talk a lot about the why of this movie and how we came to make the decisions creatively that we did. Pay attention closely to this opening shot here. I heard once that you should end movies where you began, and that was something that kind of stuck with me. So this opening shot where we introduce our character in this frozen, lifeless state will be mirrored at the end of the movie by a very similar closing shot. Now, this whole opening scene was not originally scripted. It was also not something that we shot during production. So while editing, we came to realize that the emotional impact and the character arc wasn't working the way that we wanted it to. And so we had the idea of going back and shooting additional footage and casting a little girl who was played by Cora Kaufman and opening the movie essentially on a flashback with our character protecting his daughter and coming to the realization that he may not always be able to be there for her and that something could happen to her one day. We realized that it was far more powerful to plant the image of the daughter in the audience's minds early on so that every time he visits the grave thereafter in the rest of the movie, we can picture who it is that he is picturing. And in early cuts of the movie, that was left up to the imagination of the audience, and it wasn't having the emotional impact that we were hoping for.
Right, and then all these scenes right here, or this scene in the snow, is supposed to take place years before, where we resume a little bit later on, and gives us a little insight onto, what life was for this character before,
Right.
Before his daughter dies. And we see him in this case protecting her and serving as a sort of guardian to her as well. This is life as a headhunter with a daughter.
Right, and there's a bit of sadness too for this guy from the start because he's falling asleep at the wheel, if you will, and trying to let her. He's out in the cold. He's given her the warm little shelter here under the clean blankets, and he's falling asleep and nearly freezing to death because he would do anything to keep her safe.
We always like the idea that if someday we had a chance to kind of expand on this idea of a headhunter with a daughter, and maybe in her infant, when she's a little bit younger even, what would he do with a toddler? Did he have to protect her under a rock or under some
Right.
sort of a trap or something, and then go out and kill monsters while still trying to raise a daughter?
Right.
Which is a really interesting aspect. And here we just get a glimpse of it, but
And this is important. The blood on the hands here. This is symbolic of the man coming to terms with the fact that his career, his life, the blood on his hands will one day spill over into her. And the realization, these tears in his eyes are about him realizing that he might not always be able to be there for her. One day he will fall asleep, and one day he will have his back turned. And the sadness that comes with that.
yeah, just the realization, I guess, that he wouldn't. That at one point there's just no way in this life that he was going to be able to protect her forever, and knowing that.
Right. And the use of voiceover there, that's sort of one of those things you kind of want to try and avoid, although it can be extremely effective as well. For such a visual movie where so much of the narrative is told simply by the performance and the body language of an actor and where we're putting the camera and letting the audience sort of follow along with us, we still realize that there was the need for some plot and backstory to come through in the voiceover, and it was something we were fighting for a long time and eventually just embraced. And I think that it fits right in nicely because it is ultimately from his perspective. The title sequence here is really cool and something we really liked, because you're getting all of the glimpses of the world here. We're really introducing you to a lot of specific props in production design and art department that will have much greater meaning as the movie unfolds. And if you're watching this for a second or third time, you probably recognize a lot of these artifacts. So it's kind of a cool way to introduce you into the world after we have began on a flashback. And how cool is it now? Like, you know, we also were very conscious of, once we had that opening scene, that made some of the footage that we had shot originally in Portugal have different meaning. We've seen the guy in daylight. It was cold and dreary, but he's there with the daughter. And now the next time we see him, it's dark, it's night, it's storming, he's by a fire. There's something scary. And there's definitely been something that has changed in this character from those two time periods and locations.
Yeah, and more importantly, he's in that first shot. He's alone. He's in the middle of nowhere, in the total darkness, and just living a solitary life.
And and now we really begin the introduction of kind of the clues in the way this story will unfold, and what is he doing by this fire, and what is this thing that he's drudging up out of the water. And that was one of the things that inspired us the most to want to make this movie and write this script, was the idea of taking the audience on this journey where they really are, we ask a lot of them. You know, it's not the kind of movie you can blink in and slack off watching.
Yeah, there's a lot of clues and a lot of storytelling just through the actions and the props and the interactions that he has here, and you're trying to piece it together as an audience as well. What exactly is he doing here? But you'll usually get the answer a little bit later, or you already got it. I'm trying to build this story as much as possible by continuing to call those back again.
Mm-hmm. And also just, it serves the characters well, because even though we are going through all of these little things, whereas maybe another movie wouldn't show you every step of the process to create something like this, the mechanics of it, it does put you in his headspace, because it reminds you that, like, this is really all his life has become, are these daily chores and these daily tasks. He is alone, and all he has is the death all around him. As we introduce our location, there's skulls all around him. All he knows is death. And all he has are these disgusting concoctions, and they're not really for fun or pleasure. It's for his job. It's this disgusting world that he lives in.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, we just saw him, spend 5 minutes making a potion that, yes, it is part of his job as to continuously hunt monsters and do this dangerous task that he does every day. He needs to be making this magical potion.
Right.
Yes, these are tasks. These are just his day-to-day life. I think that's what really captivated me specifically to, what I liked the most about this story was just seeing this guy go through the motions of the life of a headhunter.
It was just a glimpse into a character that we may have seen kind of on the outskirts of another film where they're just the B character, they come in for a cameo, whereas we kind of focused our whole movie around that sort of a guy. And these scenes here at the grave, so without that opening scene, we had not yet introduced the idea in this movie that this man had any form of family. And it was originally introduced only at the grave here, which if you notice, he planted his sword over there at a distance from the grave. And I remember just thinking that this character wouldn't mix war and family, if at all possible, and that there was just this one thing that the only time that he would remove his sword and sort of remove his weapon from him and disarm himself was to respect the daughter in this little bit of a religious moment. And so that distance there between he and the sword, that's as far as he can ever separate himself from the warrior in him.
Yeah, and this is what's interesting about this scene too, is that the last time we saw the daughter, she was alive and well, and the next time, years later, presumably, the next time we see her is in a grave.
Correct. And you have to pay attention to this. There's little dialogue in the movie, but this little bit here really defines and sets up the character's arc. Bringing her a gift is one thing, but the way that he sort of scoffs at the notion that this arrowhead could, transport you to an afterlife of any kind is very purposeful, because in the end he'll fire that arrowhead and take a chance on believing to some degree, whereas he really has had not very much to believe in, in the years since his daughter's death. It's a little bit of music here. Nick referred to the composer, Nick Sewell, as sort of the lonely theme, and I thought that was a really good way of putting it and capturing a moment like this that really just shows that between visiting his daughter, he doesn't have a whole lot to do besides yard work and taking a nap, waiting for the moment that this castle could call him at any moment. And we're starting to begin to introduce the idea of this nagging window too, which thematically was a very important part to this movie, and we really spent a lot of time setting up this window gag. I mean, for plot purposes, because it is paramount in sort of how this monster will be resurrected later in the film. But we really liked the idea of wind sort of representing change, and that this character might be on his way out. He's sort of an aging Viking and an aging warrior, and he might be, kicked out for the next younger guy. So there was something thematic about the window flapping, and also that if there was something that might kill this man, it wouldn't be a big, brawling monster. It would be this little thing that he didn't see coming. This scene here, coming in on horse, this was the original opening scene for the movie, and also the original scene that we came up with when we were sitting down to conceptualize a new feature film that we wanted to make together. We were throwing out all sorts of ideas, and this is what sold us on it. The idea of this guy bursting back inside and throwing this sack across the room, and what would be in that sack. And then he's running across the room, and he's grabbing these jars, and he's pulling out this mud-like paste, and he rubs it in his wounds, and it would heal his wounds. And there was just something about that character in this world that totally sold us. So this scene essentially defines the soul of the movie and what originally interested us.
Right, yeah, and actually, just before that, we saw an example of a passage of time where there's some off-screen action.
Right.
He goes away, and in between that time, he kills a monster and brings back its head. And that was, obviously because of the limitations we had with the small crew and budget. But in the end, looking at the film now in its completed form, it is really kind of a staple of the film, is this off-screen action that's happening and what happens all in between, and just leaving it all to the imagination of the viewer to fill in the blanks there.
Yeah, and we realized that, of course we weren't going to be able to pull off anything that we could envision, but also that there was something far more interesting in really making an intimate movie that was focused in on this man and his perspective of this dark world around him. And it was far more about what's going on in his face and his eyes than it was the kingdom and the darkness and the monsters around him. We felt like you've seen enough, the general audiences have seen enough of these fantasy movies, whether it's Lord of the Rings or Game of Thrones, and that you can imagine what dragons look like. You know what the castles look like. You know what the countryside looks like, and we know what werewolves and all the creatures and things. We've seen those before, so you're kind of playing into just what movies have done prior to this, and kind of using that general knowledge to our advantage by not needing to necessarily go and show that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and this is another interesting part of the storytelling here is, again, we're trying to give the audience clues as to, little by little we reveal a little bit more about what this guy does. Obviously he's some sort of a monster hunter. Actually, we won't have seen a monster until coming up right now.
We don't even know that we didn't even really know what that black ooze was for, what its purpose was until now.
Until right now, yeah. So just clue by clue, you kind of just give the audience a little bit more about what this guy's job is and life is.
People might ask, where do we get the inspiration to do that kind of a thing? And Quest for Fire is a fantastic movie that inspired us a lot. I remember I have watched a lot of over the years, certainly, the opening few minutes of WALL-E, and that is 100% a visual story that's being told there. And there's something very fascinating about making movies like that. This was really cool. We wanted there to be, again, glimpses of the larger world here and glimpses of the history and the things that have come before this movie and what might come after. In that book of these essentially these medieval wanted posters. If there were a wanted poster, like a Western sort of wanted poster, but of monsters, that's what that book is filled with. We're going to see our first head here, like Kevin said. And for some of these heads that come prior to the main head, we wanted to show monsters that felt like they were some sort of familiar territory. So this is kind of we called it the snow beast, but it's kind of like a wampa from Star Wars or an abominable snowman. Also, the monsters are doing their own storytelling that, okay, cool. Now we're telling people that there is an Arctic landscape out there of some sort.
Yeah, it was a really interesting challenge, like we keep saying about having a film like this that's minimalist, but to try and tell it through his perspective and through his point of view, and the world and the clues around him is basically you just keep trying to advance the story that way. But it makes for an interesting puzzle viewing experience.
Right.
You want to talk about this a little bit?
Well, one of the main objectives early on was how do we make the audience care about this guy? And I just thought that we needed to put him through as much pain and struggle as possible. And something as simple as getting up off the floor, we needed to slow that action down. And we needed to make it very hard for him to walk again after going through an experience like this. And when we got to the end of production, we had this idea of, oh man, I wish we would have shot this scene where he actually had to pee out the black from the night before, almost as if he was passing a kidney stone. And because we realized we didn't really have a scene that captured the side effects of this goo and this tar. And so when we went back to do some pickup shots and reshoots, we got to shoot that scene, and it's really cool. It's something I'm really happy with.
Oh yeah, it's a very memorable scene for sure. We just saw the horse there. The horse, of course, it's key to have as part of the production value. In any medieval film, you're going to have that's your mode of transportation. So it was important to kind of convey that, but also it gives our character a friend, some sort of a living thing that's not a monster, not a villain of any sort, and something that he can relate to and have some kind of an emotional connection to. And later on, we kill that too. So we're going to continue to put him through pain and suffering because, like you said, it does definitely make you feel more for the character.
Just strip him of everything, just put him through hell and back. And this is a scene too that we felt was very important to come around this sort of time in the movie for pacing purposes, but also to remind you that this is a horror film that you're watching. I mean, that was one of the things that truly sold us on wanting to make this, is there really has never been a true medieval horror film made, which is surprising, but it was something that we always reminded ourselves that no matter what we were doing, no matter how epic these locations got, we needed to frame things, and we needed the score and the sound design to remind you that you were watching a horror film. And and what says horror more than a creaking door and a monster lurking outside? I mean, that shot is out of The Conjuring or something, and we always wanted to remind the audience this is a horror film. And I think that's what gives it a really cool perspective, is what we're pointing the camera at are elements from a medieval setting, a fantasy landscape, but the way we're doing it is through the vision of sort of a horror world. Things like these hand zooms and a lot of the camera movement to reveal things, that's very much to remind you that this is cinematography from the perspective of a horror film.
This scene's kind of interesting because we have these two goblins, or orcs, talking outside his premises there, but we at one point had it. We had subtitles for it, and they're talking about stealing his jar of tar, his magic potion, and we felt like that was just going to be a little bit too comical, so we just stripped the subtitles there and let it to the imagination of the viewer once again. We show the shot. We have a shot there of the jars, so you can kind of imagine, they're going to go for that.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. That was the intent. Was to show that the potion that he has, that there are creatures and things out there in this kingdom, in this world, that are aware of this man. He kind of has this almost iconic legacy in this world, and that they do want to steal this magic elixir that he has created. Well, this coming up is a great example of what we're talking about with restraint, in that this movie is really about this man and his face. And so, for instance, here, a dragon, some sort of a flying creature, flies by, and even if we had all the money in the world, the choice would have been the same. Stay on his face, because there's something more interesting about the reaction and the awe and the wonder in this man's eyes to seeing something like that in his world than there ever is to actually showing it.
This is the first time we see him make a spike, right?
This is the introduction to sort of his process to the job.
Mm-hmm. And go for it.
Oh, just that, creating these spikes are obviously very important to the plot, and that he is this medieval bounty hunter, but he also has these trophies that he makes, or that he brings back as trophies, I should say.
Yeah, it's a choice that he brings them back as part of his job that he actually enjoys.
Right.
As morbid as that may seem, because he doesn't have to bring back their heads. That's just his quirk.
Right.
And quite an interesting choice to just live with a bunch of dead heads in your place. But these are conquests. These are victories for him.
We had a lot of time, we spent a lot of time working on these transitions, because you do need to show passage of time, that he has gone out on some sort of a quest that, that happened that night. If you watch shots like this, pay attention to the framing. We are cropping him off here oftentimes at the neck and head when he first walked in that door, very, very purposefully. This is us foreshadowing events that are going to come later in the movie by us removing his head far before it actually happens in the film. So that's just a good example of how cinematography is also just an extension of storytelling.
Yeah, choices of framing, and in this case, our lead character is going to lose his head at the end, and if you can enhance that with subliminal or subtle ways of saying that there's something foreboding that's going to come, then yeah, absolutely do it. Mm-hmm. It's subtle. No person's going to actually think about that, but you might be capturing that to a certain degree. There's a part of you that's maybe understanding that there's something that's going to come down the line by having those choices.
And I do think, like, rewatching it, I'm really glad we did a lot of that stuff, because I do think that when those moments come later in the film, you are kind of used to that. Whereas if you were only introducing those sort of shots later in the movie, I think it would stand out, and I think the audience would immediately know something's up because we've now changed. And so the idea was that we wanted to, clue you into that kind of stuff, but we didn't really want those moments later on to feel like they were something new and fresh. It needed to feel like it was familiar territory so that the reveal was more of a surprise.
Mm-hmm. This coming up has always been one of my favorite things that we came up with, which was this bucket that he has that he uses to collect the blood and goop from these heads. I mean, if you're gonna put a fresh head on the wall, it's gonna pour. It's a lot of shit's gonna come down from it, and he's gotta, his house is messy, but he's gotta at least collect the blood. And in this case, he's got to move it over from one head to the other one.
Little details you see, and I respect that kind of stuff so much when watching movies. When you see those little nuances that aren't really necessary for anything other than just, kind of pointing you into this little direction, and it plants these ideas in the audience's mind, and then they start to come up with all kinds of other things that might be happening behind what's really going on here. It was a cool shot, and we did a few angles on this, but it was always more interesting that we stayed in focus on the horseshoe. We didn't want to get too sentimental with this kind of stuff, but just great simple storytelling, saying goodbye to the horse that must have died in the battle the night before. But we don't need to overdo this. Just one simple shot, we're on the horseshoe, and let the audience decide for themselves what happened. And of course, then we're gonna, continue to further that. You notice his face there; he sort of readjusts. Like, that was one thing we had to try and work on the transitions from his healing, because we couldn't go through too many stages of makeup. So there was kind of the werewolf scar on his face was the heavy wound, and then the next morning it was sort of healed up, and then he kind of adjusts his jaw there, and that's kind of still it healing itself.
So again, one more time, just reinforcing this idea that he's lost another one of his only friends in this world. And immediately after he just killed the beast,
right,
and lost his friend, his horse, he has to go back into action, and he's not happy about it.
This is important here. He accidentally cuts himself on this spike, and there's very few times where in this movie the camera lingers after the character is gone, and I think that stuff is very powerful, especially in horror movies, and in this case with good purpose, because the blood on this spike signifies that the man's destiny, he is destined for that spike, and there is something special about that. Now, we're not actually implying that there's anything magical going on. It is much more of a thematic kind of idea. We had to, find in the writing how he would get his messages, essentially. How does his communication work? How's the narrative that if the castle's blowing a horn, how is he getting his orders? And we always thought that this man would not have any direct contact with the kingdom or the castle. We liked that there was still a distance, and it's a two-way street. It's not so much just that he is totally just shy. It's that just he does not get along with society. So, and they know it, and they will only communicate at this far distance between an arrow.
Yeah, again, in the details of how people communicate, you're advancing again more character and more story. In this case, he never interacts. He never has conversations with people. Yeah, at a distance. Mm-hmm. They're afraid of him. He doesn't want to deal with them. It's a solitary life, and that's the way he wants it.
Right. And it's the solitary life in this system, in this cycle that we're building up, that's going to start to fall apart. For instance, like when he just slammed the arrow into the ground, we had other takes where it didn't break. That was an accident. But we came to really like that because it shows, if you saw after that, at the end of that shot, you see a bunch of arrows that are sitting there intact, which have come from previous missions. But the arrow for this mission broke. And there's something about that this one is about to go wrong. And that is why we left that take in there and why we embraced that.
So here we finally go with him on one of his journeys, and the reason why, obviously, is because the monster that killed his daughter is finally back. It's back in the surroundings, and he's been called to go take its life. So we finally go, and this journey means more. And that's also part of the reason why we didn't go on a journey before. It's because we knew eventually we're gonna go follow him on his quest to go take down this monster.
This one's special.
This scene's.
This was a good one from early in the script, and just the idea that he would have some interaction in this world, some small bit of dialogue with this inanimate object.
It's kind of like the Wilson of this movie.
Yeah. Well, and we embrace the humor in it. I mean, we were talking to Chris, and just that it would be almost as if he was having this conversation with a friend at a pub, is kind of what I told him, and that he's just sitting there, and the man is so lonely. He has no one. That how dark is it, and darkly humorous is it, that the only person or thing that he has to talk to is an old dead medieval soldier that must have died out here at some point. And this troll dialogue, Kevin came up with that. I thought it was hilarious early on.
Yeah, it's the only comedy in the entire film, and it's very subtle at that, but enough to kind of lighten the mood a little bit too, and a nice little breath in the film too.
And the only time too that he ever really mentions on screen a little girl and the oath I made her, which implies that he promised to get vengeance on her, and he has sort of felt like, in some ways, a prisoner to this oath, which leads into lines in the film later on where it is done, rest easy. So there is some of that stuff that's coming out in this scene as well. But we always liked the troll gag. This scene here is another one where again we're trying to show that this character is kind of ostracized by this society, or at least he's sticking away. And for once, we kind of see him maybe wonder, what would it be like to have had another life, to have been just a regular civilian in this world, and kind of be upset by it. And he's essentially walking past a party and hearing people laughing in music and joy and happiness, and he is not a part of it. He certainly wasn't invited to be a part of it, and he doesn't feel like he fits in to that at all. And that he is on the outside protecting the people on the inside, and he is the one left to smashing skulls and killing monsters.
Yeah, and Chris's performance there, it's just, he really captures that. That whole essence of feeling left out to a certain degree.
You see him almost, like you said, you see him wonder what that life might be like for a split second, and then he switches it off as if, don't let your mind wander here.
Right.
There was an interesting thing. I remember on set, Chris was already pretty wet. It was his last day of shooting, and we were debating, do we need a bigger moment of him coming out with this sack, because it's such this headhunt is the one, this is the head. And we debated, like, should we have this awesome slow-mo shot of him rising up out of the water and dripping off, and it just felt too, I don't know, grand and sort of like too showy for this movie. And so it was one of the few times where the camera was ready, we could have got a shot, and we just chose not to because we knew it wasn't right.
Yeah, once again, we keep putting him through misery, cold and wetness and just everything, and it really just, watching this again just makes me realize that, yeah, that is why you kind of relate to this character, and why you feel bad for him and why you like him. It's just everything that we've put him through.
Right. And he's all doing it for the girl. And because of that opening scene, we can imagine the only time that we've truly seen him happy in this movie is briefly in the opening of the movie, and we've stripped that away.
This track right here is one of my this musical cue. It's one of my favorites of the entire score. It just really Nick Sewell did such a great job capturing the state of mind of this character, which is a little bit of relief, a little bit of feeling like he's completed a task, and melancholy and everything that's going through him, and maybe perhaps even wondering what would have been like to have had my daughter and the moments that he might have missed in her life.
Right. Yet when he falls asleep, we're not explicitly implying that these moments here are a dream sequence, but essentially that was the metaphor of this, that as he falls asleep, he is still looking at this sack, and all that he's thinking about are the heads on the wall and where that one is going to go on that spike there with the blood. We really open the world up in this sequence more than anywhere else in the movie, and to show he's traveled through seasons, a seasonal change, essentially, to get back home. And we're implying that he has had to go further than possibly ever before. And at his low point here, just when he might give up, what's the one thing that he would need to see or imagine to keep him going? And that is the daughter. And we're showing, just the something about the dripping of the snow and the way things are again, it's just the slow passage of time for this guy that is why we sort of embraced keeping this kind of these kinds of shots into the movie, reminding you of the Saw and reminding you of the creature that's underwater, because that stuff is going to be very significant as the movie really starts to ramp up in these following moments. This is an important shot too because of the framing. We're opening the door here and you can see we are revealing just his feet, and that is a setup for a shot later in the movie. And the way he walks in here is almost Frankenstein-like. It's stiff. But the reason for that is because he has just traveled hundreds of miles on foot, and he's exhausted and he's sore. But when he walks in the door later in the film, it's going to be equally stiff and Frankenstein-like for a completely different reason. But again, that's us wanting to plant some of those visuals early on so that when they come in later, it feels like it's been earned.
So again, right when he thinks everything's done, something that he wasn't planning on or counting on or preparing for is going to be the ultimate. It's going to be the demise here, which brings back to life it's going to bring the character or the head back to life, and it's this window that he failed to fix earlier on in the film because he was called away and forgot about it. Just something very mundane.
Yeah, the yard work that the one thing this guy doesn't count on or doesn't plan on, or the one thing that he's not going to prioritize, I guess, is fixing up his property. There's also something that we were toying with in an early draft that kind of still comes through, and I don't think that it's not true necessarily, that the concept for this monster was that it would be very intelligent. What would it have that the other monsters he has defeated over the years didn't have? And those have been strong. They've been 8 feet tall. They've had claws and fangs. But this monster would be smart. And once we started to go down that path, we really embraced the sort of like cerebral, brain-like look for the design of the monster. But in doing that too, we also kind of thought that this monster may have some form of telepathic abilities. That actually might be its superpower to some degree. It obviously it can speak, it has language later on. So there was always something too that we kind of liked the idea that window moving and knocking over that jar might not be just entirely dumb luck from the wind, but maybe there is an element of this creature that is sort of making that happen.
Mm-hmm. This is interesting. The spine. None of his other heads have a spine left on it, and that was going to be part of just what made this one a little bit different. We imagined that maybe the head of this monster, or the body of this monster, was perhaps a snake-like body, a long tentacle type thing, and that's why the spine's there. Also to kind of give it this other superpower, which was to be able to take over other bodies that are around it. Later we'll see that it takes over the body of this lake monster, or the lake creature that he uses to make the potion with. We saw earlier in the film when he pulls it back up. And then obviously we'll see him, the head, take over the daughter's body as well.
I mean, and he has never encountered a scenario like this before. For all the heads he's ever brought back, he's never had something come back to life. As far as we're concerned, he has only used this potion on himself. He has never thought about using it on something else, or certainly seen something like this. But he's smart. So what's he going to do? He's going to try it on something else dead and see, can this truly bring something back to life?
Yeah, we really, with a movie like this that's almost entirely visual, we really needed to drive home some of these key elements, story elements so we made sure that the audience understood what was going on. In this case, we wanted to drive home that this goo not only can heal you, but it can also revive something.
And it's important too that after he has squashed it, it isn't dead. It can come back yet a second time, which is again us setting up that at the end of the film, when he thinks he may have killed the monster, it indeed can still come back alive. This is one of the things I love in horror films, and I find to be truly scary, is when the camera moves away from the characters and it takes you to some place you don't want to go. It's almost as if the camera kind of has a mind of its own. And I think that as soon as you leave the protagonist, certainly someone in this case that is, a warrior that's very capable, you kind of lose your safety blanket, and there's something scary. And the X-Files did such a fantastic job of doing these sorts of shots. It's been something we've really embraced over the years. And how eerie is it to hear this voice coming from the darkness saying body, and it wants your body, and this low POV shot coming along the grass, its perspective. There was just something that we knew when we got to this moment in the movie, if we could hold the audience until now, that these moments were going to be really, really unnerving and truly scary, because there's something just very primal about a voice out in the dark.
It was kind of, we talked about when we were writing this, that it was a little bit of a take on the old tale, Tale-po, right?
Tale-po, an old children's book.
A children's book, yeah, that was about a man who killed a creature, or at least thought he killed the creature, only took the tail, brought it home and ate it, and then there's this creature in the middle of the night saying Tale-po, Tale-po,
right?
I just want my Tale-po back, or something like that.
Yeah.
And wanting it back. And so it's kind of a take on that to a certain degree, or at least an unintentional take on that.
Oh, it's
where-
intentional. That book scared the crap out of me as a kid.
Yeah, exactly. And then in this case, the Talipo creature is our head, and it wants its body back.
And there's something too that's always been scary to me about. I was always, as a kid, more frightened by small monsters because they could hide in these small places. It was the bigger things didn't really creep me out as much because I could see them or hear them coming. So there was something about the smaller things, and it just works so well too that this monster was in this sack. So the imagination of the audience, the goal here for us was that we wanted the audience's imagination to run wild about what this thing might look like. We've seen a number of different heads on the wall, and the guessing game, let the guessing game begin for what that might look like. And by literally putting something in a sack, we are withholding that information from the audience as long as possible, very purposefully.
And here we finally see that it's out of the sack, that out there in the middle of the darkness or inside his hut, this creature is out there, and it's finally, we're going to get to see it.
It's just
As
raising
the audience,
the stakes.
yeah.
And if it's inside this location and inside of this already scary set and it's lurking around in there, there was just something very, very scary to us about the idea of everything behind this. I think when you just are watching a scene like this, the feeling of not knowing where that thing is, you really don't get, horror films, great scenes are kind of just about the pacing and when do you give the audience that moment to breathe, whether it's through comedy, whether it's through a fake out scare, but constantly playing with the tension that you are creating in a scene and how long you're holding that tension and when are you going to release the tension. And I think that at this point in the movie, even though we've seen this many, many times, it still gets me.
Yeah, for sure. It's a nice, quiet moment. And I guess it's not nice. It's a quiet moment that's supposed to kind of like put you on the edge of your seat a little bit.
And there's a really cool, I'm glad that we ended up doing this. It was an idea that at one point we had this to go into the helmet for this POV shot. I thought that it would be really cool to, again, remind people this is a horror film and that inside of a slasher film like the opening of Halloween, you go into the mask and you see what that killer's perspective is. And I thought that it would be really cool to go inside of the medieval mask and it would almost be a John Carpenter-like moment to that's something that you would see in a horror film. But in our case, this is a medieval horror film.
It also really helps the scare too in that moment. You go into the mask and the sound kind of drowns out and the vision, you can't see as much and you see a little bit of how this guy has to operate and be limited by sound and sight, which puts you a little bit even more on edge, I think, for that scare that happens there too.
And yeah, and just like you said, realizing how difficult it actually is to be this guy and how impaired your vision is. Now, like Kevin was saying earlier, the monster is taking control. The head is taking control of this lake monster. This was one of the hardest things for us to get right from a story, writing, production standpoint. One of the limitations of a low budget set of special effects is that you can't always get them to animate, and you can't really, if they don't look great enough to shoot them from all angles, then you're really kind of forced to shoot certain angles, and sometimes then that limits the audience's, I guess, just how much they're seeing of the thing, and can they fully paint a picture in their head about what the action is, what's the geography, what's going on here. And that idea of body hopping that this head goes through and taking that small sort of river creature corpse and then using that to crawl through the woods and then eventually hopping to the next body, which would be the daughter, and then eventually at the end hopping into our protagonist's body. We wanted that arc of the body hopping to evolve, and that this creature here is step one, but making sure that that was clear to the audience was something we worked really hard on and hope that we got right.
It's another one of these elements or qualities that we're trying to establish, that this creature was extremely intelligent, and it's in essence trading up
Right.
to its final body, which is going to be our headhunter's body.
These eyeball shots, this was, on set. I remember just seeing those and just thinking, that's so scary. Again, something that, that close of the eyeball, the human eye, is something so horrific.
And that's what made this costume and helmet so great, was that there were so many different looks we could get out of it. If we wanted to be more mysterious, we'd let the eyes kind of be in shadow, and we'd let it be more of a hunter warrior kind of aspect, and mean and fierce. If we wanted to be more vulnerable and scary, we would show the eyes. We'd put the light through there, and we'd be able to kind of get a lot of different looks with it.
Now you've seen this creature has gotten its body stuck in a bear trap. So there's a good reason for why that rabbit was pulled out of the bear trap earlier in the movie, and we set up showing him checking these traps so that we could, set up to the audience that there are traps out there in his property, and ultimately that would snag this lake monster's body, but the head has disappeared from it. So now the character is realizing what's happening here, and as he hears it say body, 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 we want him to come across as smart and intelligent, and that he's realizing what it is going after next. And I think that this is truly the most gut-wrenching realization in the movie. And it's horrific, really, when you think about that. The one thing he's longing for is the daughter, and now to know that it is what it is doing and taking control of that body, and how terrifying this is.
Yeah, and just horrific. I mean, if this monster is already responsible for killing his daughter once, now it's desecrating its grave. It's taking over its body, this kind of sacred area, its sacred final resting place of his daughters, and now it's going to use its body to continue its quest towards his own body.
Yeah, it's fucked up what it's doing.
Yeah, yeah.
But
when we were writing that was one of the things that sold it almost the most.
Absolutely.
It was just like, oh my God, that's going to be a moment of realization for the audience. It's going to really mess people up, hopefully.
And you're hearing sounds of a girl's voice, and the things that Eric, the sound designer, did here, where the vocal cords are being changed as it is taking control of a new body. That moment there got very loud applause at the premiere, and was something that we were very happy with, because we wanted this to be as gut-wrenching and horrific as possible. We were far more interested in this movie having that the horrific, scary elements were less about the jump scares and how can we get the audience to jump, although there are still a few of those moments, but it was much more about just the gut-wrenching, stomach-churning feeling of knowing what is going on here.
And here, and with the sound design coming up here, we're going to hear the monster say "father" for the first time.
It switches from body to father, which again is its intelligence and knowing. Now, from a story standpoint, this location served us well, because we knew that we didn't really want this character to get engaged into some sort of epic battle with this thing, because ultimately it's a very fragile set of bones and body, and it's this sort of disgusting head. So how much damage could it really inflict upon him out in an open field, for instance? So we needed to come up with a way that could kind of take away some of his power. And when we found this location, not only does it look great and is it scary, but it also really helped us in that department, because we essentially realized that as he enters here, this monster would lure him in there, and that it would know that by bringing him in here, his armor would be too big and too thick, and that he wouldn't be able to bring in his sword. So we see him here sort of surveying the entrance and the size and space of it, and also then sort of testing his swinging room there with the sword, and realizing that's going to be ineffective, and he's going to have to kind of pare down his weaponry to be able to handle this thing. And now that gives our creature a chance, because it is literally hand-to-hand combat and they are 6 inches apart. And that really is the only way that this thing would have a chance at him physically.
It's also, there's water coming out of the cave, and, we figured that the monster, this serpent-like monster, when it had a body, was in its element, was near water, where he found it on the island earlier. It is much more in its element in this cave with its water. So it's luring him into a more comfortable area for it to do its most damage.
That's true. The miniature we talked about earlier was going into a cave, so its natural habitat was probably cave-like. Mm-hmm. And so it is luring him in. And with Chris too, he did such a good job of balancing this, for lack of a better word, this badass, sort of unrelenting, fearless warrior. But there's this look in his eyes where he is scared in these moments here. And that was also very difficult for us to balance, because I remember we talked so much about, well, if we've spent a whole movie setting up this unstoppable force and presence, how are we going to ever make it believable that he would have a side of fear to him? And I think, in our minds at least, that was always because he is having to essentially re-kill his daughter. He's having to kill his daughter. He wasn't responsible for his death, and he's now having to be responsible for that in some weird and twisted way. And that is ultimately what makes that look in his face, and what makes this a different experience, a different monster hunt for him.
Yeah, not only is he in unfamiliar territory in this cave and he can't move and it's very uncomfortable, but yeah, the realization that he's going to have to do something to this creature that is also going to have to desecrate disrespect his daughter's body.
Right, which the way he's treated the grave earlier, we know that is, like you said, that is sacred to him. Mm-hmm. And it is saying Father, and how messed up is this thing that it is tormenting him in that sort of way.
And coming up here, we're going to see him, separate the body from the head, kind of pull them apart, in an effort to just kind of, save face or save the memory of his daughter's body in some way.
Just get it off of her.
Get it off of her. Yeah. Even though it's kind of like a horrible moment for him, he's gonna have to say forgive me, and it really clearly hurts him to be doing this. It's the first thing he needs to do.
Exactly, and you do hear him say forgive me, because that's a reminder that of what it is that he is fighting here.
I mean, conceptually, I think this idea really excited me for sure. And
Absolutely.
It still, I think, works great on camera as well.
Absolutely. I think that at the core of the idea, I think it's something that we're very proud of. The execution of everything, of course, with more time, with more money, more resources, of course you could do things differently. But if you have an idea that you really believe in, I think you come to realize you don't need to have every little thing perfect and go and every little thing perfectly clear as far as just what the thing looks like and how it operates, and the puppeteering and the effects don't need to be perfect if there's a good idea behind it.
Mm-hmm.
And the look in Chris's performance here is incredible, and the look in his eyes, and he has all this blood on his face, and there's looking down, and Nick's score comes in here with this little theme and reminds us what this was all about. But there's something with that soft, sort of beautiful music over top of this shot of this bloody corpse. That was something that I fell in love with, the balance between heart and horror, and that really kind of sums up this entire movie in a way.
Yeah, for sure. It is that. It is a really nice balance of heart and horror. It's something that you don't really hear much or see much.
Right.
I think that's what makes this movie so different and unique.
Well, and this scene here is that too. I mean, we in the script knew that we thought that there would be this great moment where afterwards he is carrying his daughter's body, almost as if you were carrying a sleeping child back to bed, but laying her down. You could put it anywhere, but before he reburies it, to lay her down in this sort of meadow of flowers, to let her rest there while he does one final blow. And we just felt like that after he's gone through all of that, he would put some sort of an exclamation mark on this mission and just, get everything out of him and make sure that thing was dead. But if you watch closely, there's a little clue here that for 1 or 2 frames, you see that sack move. And this scene we knew was, in many ways, the movie would, whether it worked or not, would hinge on this scene here, both on Chris's performance and on the editing and on the score, on all of the elements coming together, and all the emotional elements too. And we really wanted to sort of intercut this moment of burial with pulling the blanket up almost as if he is tucking her in and putting her back to sleep. And you're seeing her face come alive there, but we were very conscious of not showing her eyes open earlier. Once she went to sleep in the opening, we haven't seen a whole lot of life on her, but there's something heartbreaking about burying his daughter again and remembering back to this opening. And now when it's done, we finally see her open her eyes as if to say, it's okay, mission accomplished.
Yeah, my soul can rest. I'm at peace now. And it's a moment that's, I mean, it's my favorite moment in the movie, and I think it's a moment that's earned. You've put this character through hell, and then, everything he did for the, this journey, this revenge, everything he's done, it was for his daughter's memory and
right.
for her soul. And finally he gets to do it, and I just think that it's really earned. And we actually got quite a bit of comments of people saying that they cry in that moment. Just, the ultimate compliment, I think, for any film, let alone a horror film.
And now the character creating an arrow out of that arrowhead that he put on her grave earlier, saying that he didn't believe in any of this religious aspect, the religious story behind the arrow, except now he's going to give it a chance because he knows that's what his daughter would have wanted. However, we, being a horror film and wanting to sort of keep this twisted nature of dread to this whole world, thought that if he shot this arrow off, inside the character might believe that there's something better to doing this, but really that arrow just lands in a dead corpse out there. And we just thought there was something very dark about it's not going to end well for him, and that was this very ominous omen about something bad is still yet to come. That of all places that arrow, this magical, religious arrow could have come down on, it came down out in the woods on something dead.
And it's also just, you have this big uplifting moment and full of hope, and you just squash all of that and remind the audience this is not going to end well.
Exactly.
So we can talk a little bit about the ending here and the decision to do it, and why we did it.
We had a version where the movie just ended there, or a version where he just sort of goes back to sawing, but those were never really what our gut said that this movie needed to end by. We always felt like this was the only way for this movie to end.
Yeah, in fact, we this one alongside with that first opening scene that we had of him coming on the horse, that was one of our first ideas. Like, and at the end, his head gets spiked on the wall of heads.
Right.
That was one of the very early on in the screenplay.
Yeah, absolutely. And you notice just on this shot here, we're really showing that blank wall there with that empty spike. The blood that had gone on the spike earlier is for him. All of the framing to cut his head off, you'll see here when the door opens, the way his feet walk in, and that's because something's taking control of his body. And there's something that just felt very fitting about this. It wasn't so much that we certainly never wanted to end this movie on a quote-unquote happy note. I think that, though, I don't see it as necessarily this negative. I mean, in a way, the character did finally get peace and rest for his soul in a way. And in a way, this too was maybe the only way that he ever should die.
Yeah, and truth be told, like, we don't know if this character is good or bad, and for all we know, these characters are these monsters on the wall have families themselves, and there's like he's killed a lot, he's done a lot of killing and taking of lives, so maybe
he's a monster himself in some ways.
Yeah, it's retribution for all the killing he's done to a certain degree. It's probably a fitting end to this character.
That's right. It just felt like the only way that he ever would go is ultimately from this.
On his own wall of heads.
Exactly. That was the fitting way for it to all end. And that smirk earlier on his face is almost some sort of there's just something malicious about knowing, what's coming. And we love the idea, too, that you introduce and expand this world by what is going to happen next. I mean, what is that thing going to do with his body out there? And it has that tar, and he's been robbed of both. And what would come next? But that tar that we've seen bring things back before could certainly bring him back. And we played with the idea that should he blink here? Should he take a breath? And we ultimately went away from it because we felt like it was just telling you too much, and we wanted you to sort of come up to those conclusions yourself. But we certainly don't think that that's the last we've ever seen of this guy.
Yeah, and we've kind of, half jokingly thought of potential sequels and what could happen with the Headhunter 2, which would be, if he's still alive, because he does have the goo on him, the magic potion on him, that we would try to see him as a bodiless head trying to go back and find his own body. Now, it's a half joke, but it certainly would be a very interesting sequel, because a reversal of roles, if you will.
Right. And yeah, I mean, it sounds ludicrous, but just the idea that there is still something happening after the credits. But I also just remember thinking that, like, the movie needed to have a very strong sense of dread and doom throughout the entire thing, and that there was something very deeply disturbing when you just cut to credits after certainly killing your protagonist. and not really putting this big kind of musical stamp on it or doing some sort of elaborate shot. It was just kind of gonna fade into darkness, and just the thought of that man's head just on the wall alone at night, and we've seen this location, we can envision, I don't know, just the dread of that, the scariness of that. There's just something, we wanted you to finish watching this movie and it almost feel like something that you had discovered on late night TV that you shouldn't have watched, and that it's kind of wrong and just something deeply disturbing.
Absolutely. It definitely leaves you with a sense of emptiness, and dread. I mean, that's the only word for it. But hopefully, not enough to just make you hate the movie or not want to think about it anymore, because there's still a little bit of a glimpse of hope that maybe he'll come back to life in some way. This character that you followed for this whole film, and that you've fallen in love with.
But if not, he in many ways died completing the thing that was driving him the most.
Yep.
So that's what makes it, I think, emotionally a pretty interesting ending. Is that on one hand, on the surface, you've got this bleak ending, this bleak outlook on things, that you are basically choosing to look at life through a negative lens. Yet when you think about it a little bit more, it's actually not as dark as it appears to be.
Right, because he completed the thing he wished to complete the most, which is avenge his daughter's death.
And he gave
to a certain
peace
degree.
to her
Right.
soul,
Yeah.
to some degree. Yeah. So it's something that we felt strongly about. We never really seriously, toyed with changing that. And all in all, this is a movie that was made by very few people with a very limited budget. But 2 years of hard work that we poured our hearts and souls into, and we hope that you guys have enjoyed the movie, and certainly we hope that you've learned something or found something interesting too by listening to us talk about the process.
Yeah, thank you so much, guys, for listening.
Thank you.